Hey guys, I have a slightly unusual video that I wanted to put together here, and it pertains to the Packers and the Lions game this past Thursday. Essentially, Dan Campbell, the coach for the Lions, made a very controversial and risky decision towards the end of the game, and that I just want to take some time here to analyze a little bit. So, if you haven't seen the game, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't seen the game, basically the Packers and the Lions were tied 31-31. And we're close to the end of the fourth quarter, and the Lions have the ball. And they have managed to drive all the way down the field to the Packers, around the Packers 20. So they're almost in the red zone. They've made a lot of progress. They're very close. And they get stuck at a fourth and inches, right? So it's fourth down, and they only have inches to get. And there's about 40 seconds left on the clock. And now Dan Campbell is faced with a decision. He can either do what most coaches would do, which is kick a field goal, right? It's fourth down. It's not worth the risk. You can kick a field goal. It's a chip shot. They're probably going to make it. You're probably good to go, right? You kick the field goal, you get the 3 points, you go ahead, and then you give the ball back to the Packers, and they now have 40 seconds to try to tie or win it. That's one choice. The other choice, the more sort of gutsy choice and the more Dan Campbell choice, is to go for it on fourth. Get yourself a new set of downs and use those downs to run down the clock to ensure that your field goal that you kick is the last play in regulation. So the Packers don't get the ball back and you just win, right? The risk there, of course, is you might not get the fourth down and then you don't get any points and you give the Packers the ball back and now they've got to drive down the field. And well, they now have the opportunity to drive down the field and win the game outright, right? You're probably not getting the ball back if that happens. And so Dan Campbell, as he tends to do, decided to go for it on fourth, and it actually worked out, despite the fact that it almost didn't. Jared Goff tripped when they ran the play, but it wound up working out. They got the fourth down, ran down the clock, kicked the field goal, and win. Right? That's wonderful. Okay, great, good for them. But there's been a lot of talk about whether that was the right call or not. So what I decided that I would try doing is seeing if I could use a more rigorous, I noticed that a lot that's at play in deciding what's like a lot of the probabilities that are at play in either scenario, either to go for it or to not go for it, are pretty knowable, right? There's not a lot of unknowns left in the game. It's like we've got either this happens, and then if they do this, then we can say for sure it's either that's gonna happen, this is gonna happen, and we know generally the probabilities of these things happening. So I thought maybe what we could do is we could analyze this from the perspective of expected value or maybe expected point differential between the Lions and the Packers. Essentially, the expected amount of points that the Lions will gain as a consequence of either going for it or kicking the field goal right away. If you don't know what expected value is, you can kind of think of it as like, let's say they were going for it on four. You wanted to find the expected value of that decision, right? Imagine simulating it a million times, and then with each of those times, determining the differential between the Lions and the Packers points, and then averaging it all together, right? And that resulting value is sort of the expected value of that decision, the expected number of points that the Lions will get. So that's what I've done, and I just want to walk through it here so we can talk about whether we think Dan Campbell made the right choice or not. So first of all, let's look at what these numbers I have, what they are. So this right here, P of T, P sub T, is the probability that a team gets a touchdown in a given drive. I use this by using 2024 across the league data so far. So the probability at any given drive that they march down the field, score a touchdown. Now this is excluding scenarios where there's an interception or there's a fumble or they get a turnover or downs. I was specifically, I'm just going to assume for the sake of this exercise that the only outcomes are a punt, a touchdown, or a field goal. So none of the more uncommon ones. So, assuming that, so removing the other possibilities from consideration, there's about a 30% chance that the team scores a touchdown on a given drive. There's about a 22% chance that they get a field goal. That's what this is. P sub F is the probability that you get a field goal. And of course, the probability of a punt is, just one minus both of these. Now, this right here is the Lions' probability of making a fourth down conversion, of converting on fourth down. Now, this is based on data from this year, from 2024. and I took the data after the game had happened, so it improved. This percentage improved a little bit after that game, so technically it would have been a little bit lower than that before the game, but it's close enough. So they have about a 68% chance of converting a fourth down. And this right here is the probability of a kicker making a 30 to 40-yard field goal, which was established by just taking all the kickers throughout the league this year in 2024 and how often they made this kick. So they make it about 94% of the time. I think the kicker for the Lions is 6 for 6, but that's not a high enough sample size, and there is a possibility of missing. So you have to account for that. So that's why I used kickers throughout the league. And then I'll explain what this O term is in a minute. But this right here, so what I've done, I got these two equations that are, the goal is to try to determine the expected number of points the Lions will have over the Packers if they either go for it on 4 or they don't go for it on 4th. They just kick the field goal. So let's talk about what's going on here. So these are these expected value calculations, and basically what they do is they go through each possible scenario and look at the probability of this scenario happening and how many points they would get if that scenario occurred. So let's think about what could happen, right? They go for it on 4. They either make it or they don't. So let's talk about whether if they make it, what happens? Okay. There's a 68% chance that they make it. That's what this term is. If they make it, we multiply that times the number of points that they are expected to get if they make the fourth down. So there is a 94% chance that they make the field goal and they get 3 points. The game ends with them having a 3-point advantage over the Packers. And that means there is about a 6% chance that they miss. And if they miss, the game goes into overtime. And that's what this O is. This O is supposed to represent the amount of expected points that the Lions will have over the Packers, right? It's really a point differential. It's the advantage that the Lions will have over the Packers if the game goes into overtime. I am assuming that this is a coin flip. If it goes into overtime, it's just a flip. It's 50-50 whether the Packers win and the Lions win. I think that that's fair. And I think that tends to really be true. I mean, quite literally, sometimes overtime, whoever wins in overtime is dependent on a flip of a coin. So that's the assumption here, and that's why O is 0. Now, it might seem kind of weird because it's pretty rare for a game to actually end with like 0 points scored in overtime or for like a tie. But you can think of this, the way this is kind of calculated, like if you wanted to calculate the actual expected number of points that the Lions would have, you'd have to take, the probability that the Lions get a touchdown and win by 6 points in overtime and multiply that times 6, and then add the probability that they get a field goal and win by 3 points and multiply that by 3, and then do the same for the Packers, right? So the odds that the Packers would win by a touchdown by 6 points, and multiply that by -6, right? Because that would mean that the Lions have a -6-point advantage over the Packers, which just means the Packers have a 6-point advantage over the Lions. But you multiply that times -6, do the same with -3 for a field goal, because it would be confusing. You'd have to consider like a team getting a touchdown and then a team getting a field goal and a touchdown. There's a lot to consider, but what I'm assuming is it's 50-50. All of those probabilities even out, so you get an expected point result of 0 points. That's where that 0 is coming from. So yeah, there's a 68% chance that we get this outcome, which, if we look at it, is approximately, which gives us about 2.8 points, right? Which makes sense. It's basically a guaranteed 3 points, but there's a small probability that it's not. However, this is the other side of the coin here for going for it on 4th, because you might miss it. So there's about a 30% chance you miss the 4th down, you fail to convert, and you give the ball back to the Packers. And now that you didn't get any points, the Packers now have the ball back. So the Packers have about a 30% chance, right? The probability they get a touchdown, 30% chance of getting a touchdown. And the Lions, and I'm assuming the Lions don't get the ball back after this, right? It's a 30% chance that they get the touchdown, and there's a -7-point differential there, right? Because the Lions have a -7-point advantage over the Packers, or the Packers have a 7-point advantage over the Lions. There's approximately a 22% chance they get a field goal, right? So that's -3. And then in the case that neither of those happen, it goes to overtime, which we've already established is a coin flip, right? So we've got this scenario, which is a net loss for the Lions of about -2.76 if that situation occurs. And you'll notice when we add all this up and we do our calculation, we find that the Lions have about it's about a 1 point advantage actually over the Packers because they did this. So it's sort of I'm not quite sure how we'd like convert a 1 point advantage to then like a probability that the Lions win the game if they do this. But the point is this yields positive expected value number of points. This is a decision they should make. It is beneficial to them to go for it on 4. However, that's not the question. The question is it better? Like it can still be positive, but is it better than if they don't go for it on 4 and they just kick the field goal right away? Right? So now that's where this comes in. So this is the no scenario. So let's think about the no scenario. Let's suppose they kick the field goal right away. It's a 94% chance that it goes in. So there's a 94% chance they get 3 points. But then the Packers get the ball back. And if the Packers get the ball back with about 40 seconds remaining, well, there is this probability that the Packers get a touchdown, which would put them at a 4-point advantage over the Lions, right? Because the Lions got a field goal. So that's a negative 4-point advantage for the Lions. So we multiply that times -4, and then there's a chance they get a field goal, which would, of course, send it into overtime. So we multiply that times the overtime points, which, of course, is 50-50. It's just 0. And then there's a chance that neither of these happen, right? And the Lions they win by 3. So that's this segment here. And then there's the chance, of course, that you miss the field goal. And if you miss the field goal, that's really bad because now the Packers have the ball back. And it's basically the same scenario as we had up here, which is, they get a touchdown or they get a field goal or neither happens and it goes into overtime, right? And you'll notice that the expected value here is pretty low, is almost 0. And them choosing to go for it on 4th gives them a greater expected value, expected number of points, and a greater expected point advantage than if they kick the field goal. And you can see right here, this is the differential between them, right? It's pretty substantial, actually. So, okay, we can wrap it up, we can button it up and say, yep, it was a good decision. But some of the more astute among you I'm sure, have noticed that these probabilities, as I had said at the beginning, these probabilities were just at any random drive. What's the probability you get a touchdown? Well, this wasn't a random drive. They only had 40 seconds to do this. So we can't expect just regular probabilities. Like for one, it is not more likely they get a touchdown than a field goal. It's way more likely they get a field goal. So we can adjust and play with these probabilities, and you'll notice that these values here move, right? So let's play with the probabilities a minute. And you'll notice, yeah, so it's 30 seconds, it's about 40 seconds left. The Packers have the ball. And what's the probability that they get a field goal within 40 seconds? Like, I don't know. I think it might be pretty high. I think the probability of getting a touchdown is pretty low here. But you'll notice if you look down at here, and especially if you look at our differential, this will make it obvious, right? If it's positive, basically it means going for it is better. If it's negative, it means kicking the field goal is better. But you'll notice that in order to get this to flip to negative, in order to get it so that the field goal is better, the probability that the Packers score have to be really, really low. Like only, look at this. It's like a 10% chance they get a touchdown, or a 10% chance they get a touchdown, and only like a less than 20% chance they get a field goal. Which obviously, as your intuition would say, in deciding which is the better course of action, it is highly dependent on what these probabilities actually are. Now, we can't know in that moment what the probability is that the Packers get a field goal or a touchdown. But if you were watching the game, you saw in that second half, the Lions were not doing a very good job at stopping the Packers. The Packers were able to run all over them, score points all over them. I reckon the probability of them getting a field goal was probably as high as 1 in 4, right? Even potentially 1 in 3, and maybe even, I don't know if it goes so high as 1 in 2, but still pretty high. Which, as you saw, in order for kicking the field goal to be a better choice, the probabilities have to be super duper low, and I just don't think that was what we were dealing with. The Packers were going to score, or were pretty likely to score, but certainly likely enough to score to make this the better option. So anyway, I thought this was a very interesting thing. I was very curious to see how it would turn out. And I guess the moral of the story here is Dan Campbell probably made the right choice. Well, that's all I've got. So thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.